if the proof of concept is not successful, and instead just like, hey, this was not a good solution because we spoke to a dozen, 2 dozen of your target market users, and they're like, yeah, this is cool, but I wouldn't pay for this. And then, at that point, it's like, okay, well, what would you pay for, right? What can we do? What can we show you that you would pay for?
Welcome to this week's episode of Zero to a Million, brought to you by Unstack. I'm your host, Zach Rego. Today I'm joined by Aram Melkoumov, CEO and co founder of Crowdlinker, a design and software consultancy that produces world class design, development, and strategy for mobile, web, and other emerging technologies. Today we're going to go deep on building a proof of concept, building an MVP, validating your product, all things a lot of our listeners are probably working on today, especially the ones that are pre-launch and currently have their beta page up and running. So Aram, thank you for joining me. Really excited to go into this with you.
Great to have you here with me today, Zach. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, no, I thank you for joining. I'm super interested in your background. We've spent a lot of time chatting about it. But let's start with kind of the early days and some of the businesses you've built or been a part of building, and then we'll get into a little bit of where Crowdlinker is going today.
Sure. Quick background. My education background was always in business and entrepreneurship. That was my major. Um, I started my first company right after school, right after graduating, literally the month of. It was an e-commerce company called Identity Apparel. It was like biometric clothing, like you could wear pieces of your own identity on you. Um, we did that for 3 years, raised some funding. Finally, after a certain amount of time, we decided to just break even and just walk away. Then I went into banking and other things to try to change a few things in my life. But then, been 12 years now in the tech space in total. After my first company, I launched another two, one in real estate. Um, it was an advisory platform for real estate agents to get connected with people who are interested in a home or like where to find a home. And then the other one was a commission bidding platform. And more recently, I did another one in sustainable energy. Yeah, and then so my main company right now is Crowdlinker, which I've been doing for 8 years now. So I've done some things along the way. I went through incubators, accelerators. I'm now part of a few like Acceler Prize, Loyal VC. I mentor and advise different startups there in different cohorts. So I want to kind of pass my knowledge, my learnings over the last 12 years being in tech with three failed tech companies, one more or less successful one currently. But it's a game, right? That you play and you win, you lose. So
Totally. Totally. So, what has Crowdlinker's focus really been, over the last 8 years? I know it's probably shifted a few times and you've got,
hmm
quite a resume of things you guys have built or worked with companies on building or designing. But take me through that progression over the last 8 years, the rises and the falls that have
yeah,
come about.
sure. So 8 years ago when we actually started, a lot of people don't know this, but we were actually a SaaS company. We were building our own products. We raised some funding. Um, it was primarily a lot of government funding that we raised at the time, so non-dilutive. We still own 100% of the company, so we never had to change anything, in our structure when we pivoted. And we built products in the event management space, and then a lot of focus on content management, content curation, and optimization. Um, Ultimately, when we were at the DMZ, which is an incubator, the largest incubator, I think, in Canada for tech startups. It's based out of, I think, through the Ryerson University program. Now it's like a whole separate entity, very well known globally. We were there for 2 years, and then we realized that the product that we had at the time ultimately was deprecated because of changes in privacy laws. Our recommendation engine that we had at the time wasn't really sustainable anymore because we weren't able to data mine certain attributes and interests of people's profiles around what content they want. So we had like a sink or swim moment. Like, what do we do? So like a lot of companies shut down and they like move on. And so we said, okay, like what are we good at? We're good at building product, but like we had the snag with things that were outside of our control, out of our realm. And so we asked companies that were in our incubator, what do you need help with? And so we had a good tech team. And so we started working with a lot of startups. I think our first 6 clients were all from this incubator. And we worked with them for 6 months, and then we got a bunch of referrals. And then, like, it was, in the rearview mirror at that point. We started scaling. We were doing development only at that time, but then we started doing the design and strategy, and then product management, then marketing. So over the last 4 years, we really like turned into an end-to-end product studio where we could take your idea from like, you know, napkin, paper, chicken scratch, all the way to like some sort of production build. And we do that now for startups, bootstrapped, founders, to high profile scale ups that are seed stage, sorry, so Series A and higher, and then enterprises where we work with their innovation, like foresight, kind of like what's next, what do we do next, in 1 to 2 years out, kind of thing. And yeah, our team's based in Toronto, in Canada, and we're now all global because of the pandemic, and so remote culture. We have team members now really all over the place.
That's great. That's great. I love I love the need that you filled, right? Like you kind of knew you had assets when you were sunsetting your product. Uh, and you had customers, they were sitting right around you the whole time. You just didn't you
Yeah,
weren't looking at them that way, right?
no,
What
no.
what at that incubator, what were the products you were building? And from a product design perspective, even today, do you feel like there's some level of consistency in what you're building, B2C, B2B, certain technologies you guys are like, yeah, we're constantly doing this.
Yeah, so very B2B focused. A lot of the things that we had that we're focused on, especially in the enterprise space towards the end of what we were doing, where we started dabbling in like early stage white label versions of Netflix. And we were doing this and selling it and positioning it like way before anybody really was scared of Netflix. And then like, we were just a bit early in the market. The way I think about it, like if we would have waited and come back to it later on, we would have had maybe more success because it picked up. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing was B2B, and even now, like a lot of the work that we do, like I think 80%, maybe more of all of our clients are all B2B. So that's our sweet spot. I think we have a good understanding of how to build a product or how to sell your product, or, from a marketing tech perspective as well, which is a big service offering of ours. Online, and how to convert and how to build a product that scales and has stickiness and things like that.
And how are you acquiring customers today? Because you're obviously going after an audience that isn't all in one spot. Like your persona can be a lot of different people in a lot of different job functions at a lot of different size companies. So it's got to be challenging for you yourself to say, here's how you market this service that's got a broad scope.
So when we were trying to figure out how to sell and position, we tried really everything under the sun. We tried like direct email, we tried cold calling, like you name it, we tried it all. Nothing stuck. And recently, my marketing team came up with a great idea of like, okay, we got to focus on brand. People have to have awareness around who we are, what we do to be successful. And so we started doing a lot of content-driven pieces, like a lot of our own podcasts, a lot of our own video series around product innovation, bringing in top subject matter experts from different companies all over the world, some clients, some prospects. And it's been a winning formula for us because marketing at the end of the day comes down to one thing, in my opinion, around success is top of mind. And you can do everything, you can, in terms of different strategies, but at the end of the day, the way to get leads and to have awareness is just to be top of mind, and that's like constantly pushing out content, showing your expertise, having awareness, the solution awareness of what you do, top funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel approaches, different tactics around how to win in those funnels. It's tough, like it's pure experimentation. Like we still haven't solved it, but in the last couple of months since we've been doing this, the amount of lead volume that we had is like exponentially higher than what we had before. And at the end of the day, it's just you know, sticking to a plan and just constantly like, hammering at it. Like it's, if you pilot something and you give it a try for a month and you give up, like you're not going to get anything. You got to keep iterating in that, pilot every week, try something else, right? And you'll get it over time. It's just a combination of perseverance and hustle and determination, like just like anything in entrepreneurship, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, podcast is as we both know, right? It's challenging, it's time consuming, and it doesn't pay huge dividends
Right away.
instantly. Like we,
Yeah, no,
it took until episode, I don't know, I would say like 23 or 24 before I started hearing people either mention it on a call with me or email me and be like, "Hey, I listened to this episode with
same.
this." And like now it's every week, right? I'm getting one or two people that are like directly referencing a podcast episode. And it's like, "All
Hmm.
right, like not huge scale. Like I'm not getting hundreds of deals a month from it, but a couple a week from, from something it's at least rewarding and telling me that something is happening, which is outstanding. So to everyone listening, don't quit, and I keep telling people that. People ask me like, "Oh man, how is it to run the podcast?" It's super time consuming. It doesn't feel very rewarding on the front end, but you'll see something there on the back end if you stick with it. So you're spot on there. Uh
Exactly.
one thing you mentioned on, a couple calls we've had is and something I think you're passionate about helping startups with, and it probably goes back from the genesis of, building Crowdlinker, of that we're in an incubator. Most of those folks are at, beta users, wait list, pre-launch, proof of concept stage, like trying to figure it out. But something you were really passionate about on a couple calls we've had together is uh, building a proof of concept. So take me through your strategy when a client comes to you and they've got a napkin. What are you telling
Yeah.
them that they need to do to get that framework built to know if this is even a viable idea?
Yeah, good question. It's something that I frequently fight over around educating people around what is a proof of concept, what is an MVP, what is a production build. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding in terms of what you should expect in what you get in those different uh, deliverables. A proof of concept for me is something as simple as a wireframe. It could be something that is clickable. It's something that you could share with somebody in a tool like Figma, or there's tons of other solutions out there in Vision. And a proof of concept is just something that you're trying to just show somebody, and you're trying to tell them or ask them, what do you feel about it? Like, what is it? What do you understand? What don't you understand about it? And a proof of concept in certain scenarios doesn't need to be built out from a technology perspective, from a dev perspective, because frankly, I'd rather um, not spend my clients' money if the proof of concept is not successful, and instead just like, hey, this was not a good solution because we spoke to a dozen, 2 dozen of your target market users, and they're like, yeah, this is cool, but I wouldn't pay for this. And then, at that point, it's like, okay, well, what would you pay for, right? What can we do? What can we show you that you would pay for? And that's the question you should be really asking. And I think where a lot of founders that we work with get it wrong is that they get into this innovator's dilemma mindset where they start going down this rabbit hole, and they might be subject matter experts in what they do. And they come to us and they ask us to be the product partners on their initiatives. And we try to be as objective about it as we can. We're like, okay, cool. You look like you know what you're doing. You're smart. You seem to be having the business acumen around it. But let's take a step back and let's assess whether or not anybody else outside your realm or like you actually want this. And it's not hard to do this. Like, it's not hard these days to go and find your target users. Like, we do it constantly with all of our clients. We use LinkedIn, we use different tools. We create campaigns, we reach out to them saying, hey, we have an idea, want to test it by you. We could incentivize those people with like $10 Amazon gift cards or whatever, you want to come up with. And all you're really doing is getting those people's time, and you're running through a problem statement with them, and you're listening, and you're assessing whether or not they have that problem. And in those situations, I wouldn't even show a solution at that stage. Get enough of it, and then go back to those users once you do a bit of sense making, and show them this proof of concept. And a proof of concept can be made in one design sprint. A design sprint is a week-long exercise, Monday to Friday, where you take your problem that you've identified or that your target audience has said that they validated that, okay, this is a problem. You bring a team together and you form what the problem statement is. You go through some user flows. Sorry, you do the user personas. You go through the user journey flows of what it would take that user to go through that problem to a solution. You go through happy paths, sad paths, like the whole kind of like approach of like, design sprint. And then you try to create a wireframe, and then like a clickable prototype with some like nice UI that just like does something. And at the end of that design sprint, you can then go back to your client or to those users and say, hey, what do you think about this? And all it cost was 1 week of time of a couple people. And designs and proof of concepts can be done with a lot less. Like these days, you don't need to be a design expert. There are tools out there like Balsamic that you can just pick up and start wireframing something out. Um, there's no code solutions that you could actually go in. I think a good one is Anima app. It's a no code approach. You go and do a design and it spits out code. Um, there's a no code marketing website solution called Webflow.
Yeah, there's
So
one
like
called Unstack.
more, and there's one called Unstack. That's it. So like the technology now is commoditized. It's not something that is your winning formula anymore. It's more about the marketing and the sales, in my opinion. Technology comes second, third, in some cases. Because if you could really go to and speak to your customers and you listen to them and you ask them the questions and you get enough of them and they're willing to buy into it and like participate, most importantly, and I think this is like key, if you can get in your discovery or in your proof of concept, even into your MVP, have those users, your target users who are willing to pay for it, participate in the design and development of it, you have from the day that you launch your product, paying customers. And I've seen it countless times, hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted where people would go and build a product and have this laser focus that this is the product that's going to build, and they build it and they don't show it to anybody. And then finally, when they do go and show it, it's crickets. It just falls. It's like a glass ceiling that just collapses, and they feel like they were obliterated, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. And they're like, "What did I do wrong?" And like, I'm like, "You didn't speak to your customers, or you didn't listen." Frankly, at the end of the day, and it's so painful because in our world, in our agency realm, there's so many people who just take people's money and they, yeah, we'll do it, no problem, and they don't question it. And then it just causes like a bad stigma for us at the end of the day, as a studio where we're trying to do it the right way, and like, we're fighting a constantly uphill battle, in our industry. Um, sorry, yeah, I've
Do you
been
push back
talking a
on
lot
clients
all the
or
time.
prospects? They're like, "Hey, no, I want you to build an MVP," and you're like, "No." Like, is that a? Do you take them one step back from where they want to go to try to keep them on the right path?
So in those situations, I ask them, well, what do you want to get out of an MVP? What is an MVP to you? Because I've seen solutions where this is an MVP, but for me, it's like a production build. I'm like, that's not an MVP. That's like a full-on product with lots of features. An MVP, and I want to steal this. Somebody said this, told me this to me, and there's different ways to say it. It's like it's a minimal viable job, or it's minimal marketable product, and MMP, right? I really like that saying. And just the other one I like as well is like the minimum viable job is that what is the one thing that the MVP does that outshines it as like, wow, this is like, I'll pay for this. If you can't figure that out, you don't have an MVP. Like, there's nothing really for you to go on there. And, so a lot of times, a lot of founders, a lot of, clients, they might say, well, I need an MVP that does all these things for people to start paying for it. Well, it's like, okay, well, let's take a step back. You're wrong. Like, um, let's break it down and understand, well, what is the real thing that they really need? It's not all these features, it's not all this functionality. Maybe it's just this one core problem that you should really focus on solving. Because if you could really solve that one problem and it works well, like, and don't overburden yourself adding in some other features, because if those don't work well, then it's just a failure, at the end of the day.
So when you said minimum viable job, my instinct was to think that there was like a human intervention. So I've got a couple ideas, and the way I've
Yeah,
thought about making it like minimum viable is like, hey, I'll build a front end that does like a little bit. And then on the back end, in the long term, it should be like AI and a bot or something that's doing it. But the bot, for
is
now,
you.
it's just going to be me or someone else. Like, what,
Yeah, for
how
sure.
often does that type of experience play out for your clients, where it's a front end right experience to the end user, but on the back end, it's just a human clicking buttons or doing what they need to do.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the whole concept of do things that don't scale approach. I think this came out from Y Combinator. I can't remember the Paul Graham said this. And what that means is essentially when you're building out a product and you're speaking to your customers, it's best for you to learn what and how they're using your product by just giving them only a certain amount of things for them to do. And then at the back end, you are actually maybe connecting the dots and you're trying to figure out how to optimize the back end, how to optimize the connectivity or the integration or whatever it is. But if you, but that's what's meant by do things that don't scale, because you haven't figured out yet how it's going to work, from an automated perspective, but you're doing it manually in order to test it out, create a proven workflow or process that can work, and then only then really think about how to automate it. Too frequently, a lot of people go and start figuring out the automation. And all you're doing is that you're setting yourself for like a disaster, because you're working on assumptions. You're working on an unproven approach. Whereas if you just do the manual effort, you'll see the tediousness of it. And you're gonna go through that grunt, you know, manual work effort, but it'll make you learn. And I think what's sad these days is that a lot of people don't want to go and spend time to learn. They just wanted to do something. And I think if when you pass that gap, when you jump past that learning point, you're missing out on a lot of like really viable intelligence, like that you'll never like truly learn from or action on later on when it comes back to haunt you or something. Um, so yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. Like an MVP for me, you're right. It's something that maybe does one job and it does it well, that it connects something, but then at the back end, you're trying to figure out maybe how to do it and you're learning. Um, but every MVP is different. Like there's no one key or one solution for every MVP. It's case by case, depending on the company, depending on the industry, depending exactly what they're trying to solve for. I would say.
And you want to validate the idea at each stage, right? So at the proof of concept stage, you're validating, is there even a problem here, right?
Hmm.
And then at the MVP stage, you're validating usage, you're validating your assumptions that you've made, but you don't want to invest in building. At what scale on each of those stages do you feel really confident, like at having your clients progress? So from a proof of concept, how many $10 gift cards should I shell out before I feel like, hey, this is enough feedback, and then so on and so forth down the funnel?
Yeah, so I would say in a proof of concept, when you're doing customer development and you're speaking to these people, you want to really aim for a sample size of like say 10 to 15 people. You don't need more than that. That's like a good sweet spot, because it's a workable amount of people that you could interface with. It's manageable. Um, you might obviously, when you go back even further in terms of how do I get those 10 users, like you might do, LinkedIn outreach, you might go to your network. It might, you might start off with, okay, I want to speak to 100 people. Out of those 100 people, maybe 10 people would be interested, right? So that's okay, that's my 10 people. Um, so, uh, when you're doing customer development and you show them eventually the proof of concept, you're asking them, okay, like, what do you like? What don't you like? what would you pay for? What functionality is missing? And really try to understand, what they would use. And what I like to do and I like to tell our clients is like ask for position an ask. It could be a financial commitment. So like, okay, cool. If I go and now build an MVP, would you give me um, money up front to do it? And that money would be used as credits. Is this a burning enough problem for you to give me like money now? And like you realize you have a product when somebody says, you know what, if you can go and make this like work in an MVP format, yeah, I'll give you like $1,000. $1,000 is a lot because like you get 10 people to give you have 10 grand. Okay. Now, as a founder, I could go and maybe get a grant to support it or something. There's tons of grant, government money that is readily available, like matching funds and stuff like that. But the fact that you're getting somebody to give you money for something that doesn't exist and it's like vaporware, that's a good sign. Um, so what I would do next is that once I have that financial commitment and like, again, if you're it's a SaaS product, then like, okay, like I'll give you the money, you'll get 6 months off once it launches, right? And then you'll have credits or like whatever it is. You could position it whatever way you want. Or you could do it as if it's like a big enterprise type of like B2B thing, do a letter of intent, an LOI, make it binding. Unbinding ones can work too, depending on the investors you want to maybe attract. But binding LOIs are huge because if you show that to investors and you said, I have 10 clients and I have these binding LOIs and they're committed for me to build this product, investors will be like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll give you 100 grand to go and build out, the MVP. And that gives like some momentum to your business. When you're in the MVP stage, you're really trying to, I think, more so connect the dots of creating a workable product that really just does one core thing, it solves one core problem, right? Once you have the MVP, you can then start marketing and selling it. You'll have obviously your 10, champions, evangelists that you have secured, but now you can easily go and maybe ask them saying, hey, I have the product now. Do you know anybody who would be willing to use it? You go to your network, and then you actually have some traction that you could show of having, a working product. Then, there's like a whole bunch of other steps past MVP, which I could talk about, but I would say an MVP is supposed to be your real proof of a business, because once you have an MVP and people are using it, and start charging for your MVP right away. If it solves enough of a problem and a pain point, start charging for it. Why are you not charging for your product that you're putting? And like, at the end of the day, you're an entrepreneur. Like, you're not doing this for free. You got to pay your bills. If you're a family, you got to sustain yourself. And you know, I I would encourage people to say that to their customers. Say, you know what? I really want to make this my business. I need your support, whether that's like, financial support or, support from paper so that I could get investors behind me. But, I want you to use a product that you'll be willing to pay for. And I want to know what that is at the end of the day. Like, how do I get you there? What is it going to take? And if you just ask those very direct questions, you'd be surprised to see what people come back to you and say. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. I understand. Like, here's what I need, right? And the transparency and honesty, it goes along.
And when do you tell someone to stop? And do you? Or have you? Obviously, you've done it yourself, right? Like you sat down, built a product, and been like, you know what? Something happened. Like let's pivot. Have you had those tough conversations with clients? And if so, when do they typically happen? Like, what's that rate of proof of concept? Only 20% make it to the next round kind of drop off. Where do you feel like you see a lot of drop off happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've had some experiences where no matter how much we try to explain, communicate, over communicate to our clients in certain situations, they sometimes, I don't know whether it's the ego or what is it, but they just don't want to listen. And it's really frustrating because we're trying to sit on the same side of the table as you are. If you really think about it, if you're successful, we're successful, because we obviously want to keep working with you, and like at the end of the day, make money, like charge you for our time, right? So if you're not listening to us and you don't want to hear what we're trying to say, and the product fails, then you lose, we lose. So it's like it's not like a win, right? For either of us. There's no win-win. And I'm trying to sometimes get that across to people. Some people get it, like, thankfully, like some of our clients that we have now and some of the ventures that we're working with right now, they get it and they're like, okay, we trust you, run with it, right? No questions asked. But it comes to a point where obviously at the end of the day, we got to pay bills. We have to pay bills. The client has to pay bills. If it gets to the point over time where we're not seeing the results that we need to, and we have to obviously set some sort of KPIs and metrics, and those are something that we mutually have to agree to. Okay, like, is it a daily active users, monthly active users, session times? Like, what is it? Like, what are the KPIs that we're trying to hit? Is it revenue driven? Like, what is our, MRR that we're trying to hit? And if we're just not there, we're like, okay, we pause, we reflect. We're like, why aren't we there? What are we doing wrong? Do we need to go back to the market? Do we need to go back to speak to the people? What are we missing? What do we get wrong? You know? And it's like it's a difficult time emotionally, to be honest, for the team, for us, and for the client, at times, because there's all the spend leading up to a certain point, and we obviously don't want to lose it because it's like a lot of passion, energy, and momentum went into something. Um, we've had some projects that we spent months working on, especially with a really large enterprise, massive team. Like we had like a large team involved in it, and it got a lot of buy-in from the stakeholders at this large organization. They're like, okay, cool, we're gonna go and put more money and backing into it. And then out of a sudden it got shelved. And the team internally got really discouraged because we never really understood why, right? And it was just like a, bad timing. COVID hit. It could have been that. Um, but the most frustrating thing, to be honest, with team members in a product studio is they obviously want their work to be shown, to have the spotlight, to have the publicity, and not so much about like, press. It's more about, hey, we built a product that's being used by millions of people, kind of thing, right? And when those products don't make it for whatever reason outside of our control, it's just frustrating for everybody. Um, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
It's a constant juggle, right, over priorities.
It's an interesting dynamic for you too, right? Because it's not. I get how your team is so heavily invested, not only from a time perspective, but they want to see their work succeed, and your team is basically going through a pivot, right? Every time they lose a client, that has something happen within your control or without, and then have to pivot to a new project, which they got to then kind of get that emotional buildup and investment into it. It's like, how do you as a leader, and this is totally off topic, but I think a lot of founders struggle with this. How do you coach your team through those constant pivots? And how would you, any sage advice you have for founders that are potentially about to go through something along that line?
Yeah, it's great question. I know a lot of founders, a lot of SaaS companies. Um, Sometimes things go out of their control and it depletes the morale internally in a company. Frankly, that's where you really got to shine as a leader and, build that momentum back up again. Put some encouragement, do those one-on-ones. Um, Talk to them, say, okay, what can we learn? Do those retros with the teams. Um, find the next thing to work on. Like, build, take that negativity and problem that you're behind, and get the team rallied up, whatever way. Go to an offsite. I mean, it's tough these days to do these. Like, you got to do them virtually, but find a way to break out, do a fun activity together. Decompress and take time off. Like maybe take a few days, take an extended weekend, everybody disconnects and say, okay, let's like look at this with a fresh pair of eyes, get them rallied up and get them focused and start looking at the data again or start looking at what the problem is again and really try to be as that support at the end of the day. As a CEO, like the best thing I could do is act as that, soundboard, that voice of reason, that vent to me, tell me what your problem is, and be as that coach, right? I think CEOs, you have multifaceted roles, but um, when you have a team around you and you have issues, you really need to act as just more of like a coach, as a mentor. Um, talk to them, see maybe there's personal things going on or whatever it is, and just try to bring it together again. And it's tough. Like honestly, like it's not something I have figured out, completely. But I think being there is step one. Listening is step two. Being that coach and friend is step three. Like it's tough. There's no book around it. It's just like be there when they need you. Period.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic to your business that I think I think a lot of agencies, marketing or otherwise probably deal with, but it's, yours especially like mission and vision and when you're designing and building a product, like those north stars are like really easy to become attached to for the product you're building. Never mind the fact that they work for Crowdlinker and not, the other and your north star stays consistent. But man, I imagine that's super challenging and you know, engineers and UX and designers, they're problem solvers, right? So they want to solve the problem, and I think it's got to be super challenging. I don't envy you for that. I imagine you've got a lot of emotional intelligence that other leaders may or may not have been able to build up over the years.
Yeah. I
So
think I think the other thing is um, really staying true to your values, your beliefs in terms of why you do certain things, and having the team resonate with those values. We try to build a product that has a North Star metric of improving people's time efficiency, people's lives, in some variation. And um, I think getting simply behind those type of like higher level goals as North Star metrics, as whatever they are, is the baseline, I think, of how to get a team behind something. Everything else kind of follows around it, like follows under it. Um, but yeah, it's a struggle sometimes because we work on so many different products at any given time, and each one have different metrics, and just trying to tie them all together, or try to see what time we need to go work on what to help out the team, on whatever problem they have or facing. It's it's exciting, it's challenging, but it's never ending at
yeah,
times.
yeah, keeps you on your toes. Uh, Last question, and Aram, thank you so much. This has been really, really insightful. But last question we ask every guest: two books you recommend every founder reads, uh, fiction, nonfiction, to get themselves either prep for their journey or provide some motivation as they go through their journey.
Um, I would say How to Make Friends and Influence People. One book I would recommend. Um, there's one that I actually started reading. Um, it's oh my God, the name is blanking me. I'll send it to you later. But it's a book about generalists. It's become really popular these days, and it's a book that talks about how in today's world, the specialists aren't the ones that are going to be really the successful ones. It's the ones that are the generalists, people who are good at different things, because you need to be a generalist in kind of in everything that you kind of do. Um, and it talks about different athletes and different things that, just because they're really good in tennis, they actually are good in other things. And that's what gives them the success. Um, God, the
Is
name's
it
evading me.
is it Range? I searched it. Well, Range
Thanks. Yeah,
by
range. Yeah.
David Epstein. Yeah.
Yeah, great
That's a
book.
new one. Yeah, no, it sounds very interesting, and for me, it makes me excited because I'm much more of a generalist than a specialist in anything. So
Uh, And I think it's like today, in today's day and age, I think it's the winning formula, to be honest. Because when I look at myself, I consider myself more of a generalist than a specialist. And I look for team members and traits who are generalists. Um, because then we're all like working, on a similar type of like skill set.
well, something you mentioned earlier, and obviously part of the thesis behind Unstack is uh, technology is becoming commoditized, and over time, our goal is to take the non-technical generalist and empower them with the tools they need to execute on what those specialists would have historically been involved in.
Very
And
true.
more, no code tools are being developed to empower the generalist. Um, so it makes sense. In some, you need the developers to build the no code tools, which is crazy, but once they're built, now you're empowering the rest. So there's definitely some alignment there, and how to make friends and influence people is uh, a great one when you talk about building the mission, vision, values, and managing the folks through tough times and being a coach and a friend. So definitely two very relevant books for us. Aram, where can everyone find you and follow you and get some more content from you?
I think on my LinkedIn page, there's a lot of references to a lot of content that we have on YouTube under our company YouTube account. We have a lot of information there about different things to consider if you're raising money, different things to consider if you are creating a product, things to consider there. So two very different streams of content, but I think there's a lot of great information there that people should check out. Yeah, I'm excited to have him on our podcast called Off the Record. Thank you. Thanks, Zach.